All right. Having said that, what was the homework? My understanding is it's when you're so the room you're in should show their appropriate exits and stuff, right? And then when you move between, you shouldn't be able to go to an exit that doesn't exist. And then when you move to a room that does exist and you come into the new room, it should show now the room with the appropriate exits. Is that accurate? That's all we had to do? Okay. Yeah, I said that. Yeah, if an exit's not there, if you don't have an exit to the west, you shouldn't be able to roll to the west, right? Okay. So let's start off with making sure that we can turn on and off exits. All right, at all. Okay, before we start asking which exits we should be able to turn on and off. All right, so let's go in here. Let me just see what our current state of the world is. Right now, he just goes between rooms and stuff. Okay. When it gets to the center. Okay, got it. All right, so let's start off with being able to turn exit on and off. And let's see where some of our scripts are. Who has that? What does player have? We have a player controller. Does he know about the exits? Oh, that's a good place. Player controller knows about exits. I'm going to need to know about exits to turn exits on and off, right? Okay, so that might be a good place to start. So since my player controller knows about the exits in the room, he would have the option to turn exits on and off. All right. So it's north, south, east, west. These are the guys that we want to be able to turn on and off. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my player controller. And that is not I didn't click controller. I clicked on the player object. So here's my player controller. All right. And here are those exits. Okay. Those are the public thingamabobs that we used MVC to connect from our Unity editor to our code flippy dealy thing, right? All right. So I want to be able to turn these guys on and off so I can visually know whether they're there or not there. Okay. So let's just go into start here. We'll just start off with this. And why don't we just turn off the north and the east exit? All right. So we'll say this dot north exit dot, what do we go? Active equals false, or is it set active? Set active. Something like that. This dot, what is it? East exit dot set active. False. Okay. So if this works out, when this guy first launches, the room I'm currently standing in, the room the player is in, should now have a north exit that isn't there and an east exit that's not there. So we should only have south and west. All right. So we're just doing our initial thing. Let's make sure we can turn exits on and off. All right. So far, so good. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to associate, because what we just did is we just pulled out of the sky. We just decided to turn off 2 of the exits. What we want to do now is we want to associate which exits are on and off based on the room we're currently in. Okay. So how does a player find out about the room that they're currently in? Well, in our singleton master data, we have a player object and we have our dungeon object. At all times, a player knows about their current room. So at any point in time, we can ask the singleton, hey, player. Now, this is the player data structure that lives behind the scenes. He's kind of the guy associated with our little player rollerball dealy flippy, right? Okay. So we could say, player, what room are you currently in? Give me that room. And then we can ask the room, what exits do you have? And then turn off the right exits. Make sense? All right. So what we're going to do inside of our player controller, I'm just going to write a function in here. We'll say private void. We're going to call this guy update exits. All right. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to say room R is equal to new, actually not new. Room R is equal to master data dot p dot get current room. All right. And here we'll actually just name this better. We'll say current room. So the current room the player's in is now stored in that variable, right? So now what we want to do is we want to ask the room what exits are available. So let's go into room here. What options do we have? Oh, we have an option for has exit. Oh man, look at that forethinking from weeks and weeks ago. Oh, so I just have to ask if it has these exits. Oy. So we'll just go in here and we're just going to go, we're going to say if current room dot has exit north. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it this way. If it does not have the north exit, and maybe you like it better by saying if has exit north is equal to false, if you like that version of that question. So this basically says, should the north exit be turned off? Then we'll say this dot north exit dot set active to false. And we're going to do that for all of our exits. So north, south, east, west, and then make sure we're setting the right exits. So we will set exit active on the south exit there, active on the east exit there, and active on the west exit there. All right. So this is our update exits function that I've written now inside of my player controller. And we want to call this function one time when we enter a room, right? And what do I want to do? I want to update the exits in the room that I'm rolling into to match up with the exits of the room I'm currently in, according to my dungeon that's built up in the our singleton. Make some sense? So if I want this to happen one time when the player first enters a room, when would I do this? Inside of start. Is that a hammering? Or is he dragging the toaster behind him? Today it's an air fryer. That's what it is. All right, so inside of start here, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say this dot update exits. Okay. So now when we first start our dungeon, based on the, if you remember computer science dungeon, don't we just have an exit to the north? So when I first run this, I should see only an exit north. Let's see if that is true. All right. So now this room is updating based on the exits we're looking at, right? All right. Questions about any of that so far? Go ahead.
So just, what would be the reason for the player as opposed to dungeon setup, especially if you have multiple players?
Well, I didn't even look at the dungeon setup script, but I just noticed that player has access to the exits. Let me just check what he was asking first. Oh, we do have it in dungeon setup as well. So I certainly could have done it in there. Yeah, I would say not necessarily an advantage. Maybe we can say our current mentality is that we're kind of doing everything from the perspective of the player, maybe. So the player magically controls his surroundings, something like that. All right, what was your question? Oh, well, nothing's going to happen now because I'm not updating anything. Well, I mean, it's literally not going to change. Well, okay. So what will happen when I get to the next room? The next room will still look like this because the player will not be in a new current room. His current room will not change yet because I haven't written that. So if I go north and I go through there, now he's going to get to the center. Oh, why didn't they turn back on?
It's reloading the room. Yeah, it's reloading the.
Well, no, I'm loading the scene, aren't I? I'm not resetting the room. Oh, I said it out loud. It's still only going to have a door to the north, but okay. The player, when he rolled through the north door, in our minds, he's now entered the next room in the hallway, which should have a north and a south, right? But we have not updated the player object inside of our dungeon to actually have moved into that room. We haven't told him to do that. So since we haven't told him to do that, from his perspective, he is still in the original room, and this is what that room looks like, right? So forever, if I keep going to these rooms, it's going to keep reloading this because I have to update my dungeon behind the scenes. Now, also remember that right now, this guy can still go in those directions, but notice that we don't get him back. We don't load another scene because we have now got rid of our collision boxes. Okay, so our collision boxes that triggered us, remember we had the on trigger enter, the collision boxes that triggered us to reload the scene are now gone on everything that doesn't have an exit. So it's super important we don't let him go west or east or south here. Make sense? All right, so what we need to do is we need to control him from even starting to roll in those directions unless it's an exit that actually exists. Okay, so we want to go back and look at our player controller. And we want to remind ourselves, how does this guy do his movement? All right, and this is probably inside, oh, that's player object. It's probably inside of update, right? So at update, if update, if we're pressing the up arrow and we're currently not moving, we only want to do this stuff if there's an exit. Make sense? So now we would say, you know what, we need to use the room a couple different times. We could go back and make our room variable like a global variable, or I can just come up here and I'm just going to steal this line of code real quick. I need to kind of give myself access to the current room the player's in again. So I can ask the room, hey, do you have an exit to the north? If you do, I'm going to let them start rolling. If you don't let them roll. All right. So I'll come back down here to update. Go ahead and give myself that guy. Go ahead.
Access to all the exits with the variable.
You could ask if it's active. Yeah, so that's what you're saying. You could say, oh, is the exit to the west an active exit? You could. Yeah, absolutely. So what he wants to do is inside of here, we'll just pat another thing. We're going to say, was this for we're going up. So this is north. This dot north exit dot, what is it? Is active or just active? This dot north exit. I think this should work. Or is it get active? If it's get active. Reveal yourself. That's what you think? Yeah, well, let's just do it the way I was going to do it. I'm sure we could figure out the way to ask the game object, are you active or not? You said you used active in hierarchy, so I'm guessing that probably does work, but I'm just going to ask the room, was there an exit to the north? So if current room dot has exit north, then we're going to go ahead and let him do all that stuff. Okay. Similarly, if we hit the left arrow, we're interested in whether or not he has an exit to the west. We hit the right arrow, we have an exit to the east. And if we have a down arrow, we have an exit to the south. So now, in update, when the player hits one of their arrow keys, before we apply a force and set R is moving to true, we're going to make sure they have to first pass the test. Is there an exit in the direction you want to go to? If there is, we'll let them roll. If there isn't, we're not going to let them roll. So now I should only be able to roll to the north. So if I try to go west, it's not going anywhere. Try to go east, it's not going anywhere. Try to go south, it's not going anywhere. Try to go north, it's going somewhere. All right. So we got that part down, right? All right. Last piece is as he goes through one of those exits, we want to go ahead and update the place the player is going, right? All right. So how do we do that? We have the room has exit. Take exit. So we're going to say we want to use the room and take the exit. So we'll go into player controller. So along with this stuff, we're going to say current room dot take exit master data dot p. That's our player. We're going to go to the north. So if we're allowed to go to the north, we're going to let our room know that we want to take the exit to the north. If we're allowed to go to the west, we want to take the exit going to the west. If we're allowed to go to the east, we want to take the exit going to the east. If we're allowed to go to the south, we want to take the exit going to the south. And after you take that exit, what happens? The player's current room will change, right? Because that's how we wrote that Java program. When you took an exit to the north, you went to that new room. That room then set that player's current room to the new room. So that when we load the scene again, and we go to the start for player controller, and he asks the player, what room are you currently in? He will now have a room with, if we went through the north exit, with a north and south, right? So let's go back here. So there's my north. So we'll head north. There's my north and south. So I'll go back south. So we'll keep going through the department here. So we'll go north. We'll go north. Now we're in the main hallway. We'll go east. Still going down the main hallway. We'll go east. And now we'll come into this classroom right here, S118B. Is that it? That's all the homework? Dun, 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 dun. All right, so what do we think? Easier than you thought? Well, I don't know. We got a guy back there who's been doing Unity for a while. But I probably get by. Now, what I want you to get from this is notice the way we went and solved that. We did one little piece at a time. I said, hey, let's make sure we can turn exits on and off, right? Well, we don't really need to turn them on because every single time we reload the scene, we get fresh exits that we then turn off again. Does that make sense? Okay. If you did notice that kind of the exit follows them in, you notice how, I'll show you. When I first go north, watch the south exit. I guess it kind of popped up in real time, but it almost seems like you saw the player before you saw the door. Although I guess you could say, well, that looks kind of cool that, he comes through the open door and then the door shut behind him. Perfectly intentional, right? Yeah, I guess it does pop up pretty good. But in any case, what I was going to say there is if you didn't like the timing of when the doors show themselves or hide themselves, one thing you could do is move that logic maybe into the main camera, put a script on the main camera, which will have all those things happen before you can actually see the scene. So the main camera's job is to show you stuff visually. And if you put stuff in the start function of the main camera, presumably that will happen before you can visually see anything. I'm not positive, we'd have to experiment with it, but if you weren't happy with the timing of this, you could maybe move the script to a different place and get it to happen a little bit earlier. It might be a frame earlier or something, but we'll call this good. Okay. But in any case, so again, getting back to this idea of how did we solve this problem? I first wanted to make sure I had the ability to turn exits off. Once we had that ability, then I said, okay, well, now let's figure out which exits do we want to turn off? Well, who knows about the exits that we need to turn off? Well, first we have to ask the player, what room are you currently in? And that's the point of this homework, where we kind of connected our view here, okay, what we see as our front end, to the governing data structure, our dungeon that we built the first 8 weeks of the semester, right? We already know that guy plans out this computer science dungeon and it keeps track of the rooms, what room the player's currently in, lets the player move from room to room to room. All we're doing now is we're connecting those two by saying, I want the current room I'm in to match the current room that the player object's in, our instance of player. And then just make sure that I move the player like a chess piece from room to room under the hood through our dungeon, like we did when we were doing this in Java, so that when I get into the next room and I ask about the player's current room, I can get an updated set of exits. Okay, so we asked the question, who knows about the current exits in the room? Well, the player knows the room they're currently in, and that room can tell us what exits they have. So then we formulated the questions we had to ask. Okay, if you don't have a north exit, we'll turn that guy off. If you don't have a south exit, we'll turn that guy off. If you don't have a west exit, we'll turn that guy off. If you don't have an east exit, we'll turn that guy off. So all the exits start off as on, and then we just turned off the ones that don't exist, right? And then the last thing we did, well, then we said, okay, well, make sure that once you're in the room, we don't let you go in any direction that doesn't have an exit. So again, just some questions. Okay. If there isn't an exit to the west, don't let me roll to the west. If there isn't an exit to the east, don't let me roll to the east. Don't let me roll to the north. Don't let me roll to the south. That prevents me from mechanically going in the wrong direction. Because if I didn't put that in there, I would potentially go to the west, let's say, from our very first room. So if I was allowed to go to the west here, I'm pressing left over and over again. It's not letting me now. But if I didn't put that logic in and I went to the west, I might even update the dungeon under the hood, but I'm never actually going to load a new scene, right? Because I'm not hitting that the hitbox there. I'm not hitting the on trigger enter. But even if I was hitting that guy, depending on how we handled the error behind the scenes, if I told the room that I'm currently in, I want to take the exit to the west, this room doesn't have an exit to the west. Therefore, you would be in, it probably stops us from doing it if we, I'm guessing we probably ask the question, does this room have an exit in that direction? If we say take exit, we go through and we look for the exit we want to take. Then we ask, did we find the exit? If we didn't, then the exit wasn't found, so it won't actually update the player. It won't update the player, so their current room would still be a legitimate current room. But we need to make sure we don't allow the state of our dungeon to change unless the state of our dungeon should change. All right. So we were moving puzzle pieces. We made whatever we see on the screen match up to whatever we were keeping track of with a lot of times that would be called our back end code. Okay, so we have this back end code, which is our current state of our dungeon that has the current state of the player and what room they're currently in, right? And we just made sure that the current room we're in always held true to that. All right, make some sense? So I encourage you whenever you're doing this stuff, just like, go back to last semester, I say you always draw pictures. You need to break things down into tiny, tiny pieces. Don't just try to solve all the world's problems at once. Take one little step at a time, and then it isn't very difficult. How difficult was it to turn on and off exits? Not very difficult if that's all you're asking me to do. Okay, well, now that works. Okay, well, now how difficult is it to turn on only certain exits, specifically exits that you want to turn off? Okay, then it's a little bit harder. You gotta make sure you ask the right questions, right? And you gotta say, well, who knows about this stuff? Which of the puzzle pieces that are laying around here knows about the exits in the current room? Well, my player does. And who has the player? My singleton. Give me access to the player. What room are you currently in? Now I got the room. What exits do you have? Ask those questions about that, it's like the magic 8-ball, right? Do you have an exit to the north? Seems likely, right? Okay, you get trues and falses from it, right? Right. So really try to go through that process. And the thing is that is the process that I go through when I'm programming. If I'm doing it myself and I'm not saying it all out loud, I might go a lot faster. But I'm promising you that mindset is identical to what I do. And there is a limit. There's a point where maybe a project gets so large that I have to start drawing some pictures myself. You can only conceptualize something so large at once. This is a pretty small little thing that, I can conceptualize it, but that same process I'm telling you to do, the same thing I'm saying out loud is exactly what I do. I don't skip 5 steps. I take it one step at a time. I would have written this identically to what we just did. Okay, I might not have questioned my use of the player controller script. Turned out it worked out pretty well in here for that, but because we needed the room anyways in order to actually take the exit. But yeah, whatever. All right, questions about this? Right here. So if I press the right arrow, for example, and the room has an exit to the east, this is when I asked the current room to take the exit. And I said, here's the player that's taking the exit. This is the direction they're going. And then I made it visually true right there. So this is updating the back end to make my future room a new room. This is updating my front end so that we as observers of our game see the awesome high speed movement of our ball rolling to the east. Okay, we might want to increase the speed a little bit, but it's okay. Yeah.
So could you really visible door and have it like when you enter a room, the door is not like shown, but it's there. Like a secret,
Okay, so you mean, can we, for instance, can we have a room to the west that technically is there but doesn't visually show up there? So only somebody who knew about the secret room could get, yeah, you could, but we'd have to maybe modify our underlying dungeon. because you'd have to decide, well, now a room doesn't just have two states. It doesn't have exist or not exist. We maybe also have hidden versus not hidden, right? Because now you need to keep track of like, well, is it a room that just has the invisible door? So it's there, but it's not. Okay. Is it not there? Or is it not yes there? Or you know what I'm saying? So the answer is absolutely. You just have to write the code to be compatible with that. I would say our current implementation would require, well, not stupid changes, but some changes in order to have a hidden door. All right. Other questions? All right. So what would come next? I kind of mentioned, I think last time, that what I want to have happen. Let's see. Final Fantasy fight scene. Dun, 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 dun. Oh yeah, old school right here. Oh, we're getting pop-ups. Here, we'll just go here. All right. So now in the original Final Fantasy game, when you ran into a monster, which happened just randomly. If you remember last class, I mentioned this at the way you power leveled in old school Final Fantasy. You just kind of wandered around in the woods in an area where you knew you could beat up all the monsters and just kept getting in fight after fight after fight after fight and get your guy 2, 3, 4 levels ahead of all the other monsters. Then you can go fight the boss. Okay. But when you do enter a fight scene, so this would be another scene in our application, right? Now, in this particular game, we have 4 different players. In our game, we have 1 player. So we maybe have this one dude here, okay? But maybe we allow there to be a couple of different monsters in there. You know, we can decide how we want to represent monsters. Maybe monsters are squares, you know, cubes or something like that. You know, because you know, our player is a sphere. So maybe monsters or cubes. If you want to start messing with assets or something like that and actually have player models and do something, you know, cooler, it really isn't very hard. But if you want to do that, that's fine. But I want to focus more on the logic aspect of this. So you can choose what you want for your monsters, but I'm suggesting maybe monsters are cubes. Okay. And the way it would work is there would be a back and forth. So, you know, in Final Fantasy, you know, when it's this guy's turn right now. You see how he stepped forward? He gets to go first, presumably in this. And notice this guy has, you know, they have hit points. Okay. I guess they lucked out there. There was a reasonable chance that you go into these things that there was like an inappropriate name here, but there ended up not being. We lucked out. Okay. So in any case, Hacks here, you know, he's gonna choose whether he wants to fight, use some magic, drink a potion, use a special item, or run. We're not going to be that complex. You know, maybe we give the option to either fight or run, something like that. And when you run, there's like, you know, somewhere behind the scenes, there's like a coin flip where you try to get away, right? You try to get away, but you know, sometimes you fail and you got to stick there with the fight. All right. But in any case, let's say we chose fight. So then we're going to do a, you know, before we even wrote our dungeon, remember we kind of wrote that death match thing, right? Now we're going back to our death match. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to roll the dice. You know, does that clear this guy's armor class? If it does, well, we're going to hit him. How hard do we hit him? Well, we roll the dice again based on how hard he's capable of hitting. And we smack one of these guys. All right. And then these guys get to attack you. And then you get to attack them and so on and so forth until somebody dies. All right. Make some sense? So that's the next thing we want to add into our game. All right. So now what we want to do is we first need to be able to create a random number. So let's just do a C# random number. There might even be a random number generator specifically in Unity, but yep, random, blah, blah, blah. Perfect. All right. So I'm just going to do this inside of start real quick. So I'm going to say random R is equal to new random. Just need me to import something. Usually generate. Oh, Unity does have a random. So I'll use Unity's random then. So we'll do a print random dot. So let me get a well, it returns a float. All right. So we're gonna put in a random range. Oh, that one's deprecated. Just range. All right, so we're gonna print a random range between 1 and 10. All right, and why don't we go ahead and do that like 10 times? Okay, very similar to what I did before, right? With our exits, I said, hey, I need to be able to turn exits on and off. Okay, well, before I can start rolling random numbers, I gotta learn how to generate a random number. Okay, quick Google search. You know, I question, does Unity have that built into it? It's a video game engine, so probably looks like this built-in C# random class is identical to Java's random class. So I was going to start using that, but yeah, this is a random number thing. Now this is going to give me a floating point number, so I'm guessing it's going to give me numbers like 3.6 and that kind of stuff. But let's go ahead and take a peek. So the player controller is going to just generate 10 random numbers when it first starts up. Let's see what those guys look like. Oh no, we got whole numbers. There we go. All right, so it still returned a float. That is interesting. Although I wonder, it said that there was 2 overloads. I wonder if you give it 2 integers, it returns an int. I didn't look at the overloads, so there might be 2 versions of range. One that takes 2 floats and gives you a float. The other one might take 2 ints and give you an int. Yeah, so if I go ahead and change this to 1.0 and 10.0, I need to put an F after that to tell it it's a float, not a double thing. Yeah. So looks like there's 2 versions of range. You give it an integer range, it gives you an integer. You give it a floating point range, it gives you floating point numbers. We probably want integers, right? All right, so I'll leave that in there for right now. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my assets and I'm actually going to go ahead and move my dungeon room into my scenes. And I'm going to delete the sample scene so we don't have confusion there. All right, now I'm going to create a new scene. And we're going to call this guy fight scene. All right. So we'll go ahead and start from scratch here on our fight scene. So very similar to what we ran into before. I'll go ahead and just lay it out a little bit for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a sphere. Okay, so there's my sphere. We'll call this guy the player. And then we're going to add a cube. Ooh, we can also do capsules or cylinders. Okay, but we'll do a cube. And we'll call this guy a monster. And we will move the monster a little bit. Let's create a couple of monsters just because. You can decide how you ultimately want to do this. Let's see what the camera looks like here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the camera immediately above these. And then I'm going to rotate it. What I want to rotate it on the, that's Y, X. Okay, so I think it says 90 on the X, right? Oh, I need to go up in the air too. Am I doing my rotation wrong? Oh, I said 90 on the X, but I put it on the scale. Somebody stop me. All right, so now I'm looking straight down at my stupid fight scene. You can make it look as awesome as you want yours to look. So we're gonna call that, starting point perfection. So what should happen if you run into a monster? We probably want to enter into this fight scene. So for homework, so given that, and I'll make sure I push my changes here in a few minutes. Okay. Let's say introduce fight scenes into our game. A fight can randomly break out while moving toward an exit. The chance of a fight breaking out is, let's say, 30%. You can decide how you want to implement that. Now, my hint to you would be, you might want to go ahead and make it 100% initially for testing purposes. Okay, that way you don't have to run your game multiple times and move from room to room to room until you finally hit the lottery and test whether your fight scene works. Okay, but in the end, the chance of getting into a fight is 30%. Roughly a third of the time you should get into a fight, but 2/3 of the time you make it to the exit and move on to the next room. All right. So we'll say, once a fight starts, transition into the next, or transition into the fight scene with the player and monsters ready to fight each other. A player and monster should have hit points, an armor class, and a random attack between 1 and 5. Hit points, we're going to say random 10 to 20, let's say. Armor, we'll say also 10 to 20. Let's go 10 to 17. Well, probably not yet, because I'm not actually going to have you do the fight quite yet. So what I want you to do for this assignment is, when your guy is rolling in a certain direction, have there be a 30% chance of getting into the fight. So 30% of the time you should transition into the fight scene, but we want to have our fight scene show the current hit points, armor class, and potential damage of both the players and monsters. You do not have to actually make them fight yet. So we're basically doing the full setup to the fight. Okay. You pick an exit, start rolling towards an exit. 33% of the time, it takes you to a new scene. That scene should show the player, and you could have it show one monster, two monsters, whatever you want. But I want to see the stats for the monster and the player. How many hit points do they have? What's their armor class? And how much damage are they going to do? Proving to yourself that it's a random number in the right range. For right now. Yeah, because we're not actually fighting. We're just proving we can, get ready to throw down, right? It makes sense what I'm asking you to do? All right, so that's for Monday.
When you actually run into, you say on the way.
Yeah. So no, I would say, so if I'm in this first room here, as I'm rolling towards that exit, 30% of the time, it would stop me and break to a new scene. Well, you might ask, maybe as soon as you start moving north, maybe you roll the dice and say, is my guy going to get into a fight scene? If yes, only have him roll a certain distance and then break into a fight. How might you pull that off? That's what you want to think about. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes? Go ahead. No. You want the player controller? Oh, next guy. Normal update. Okay. And this code's going to be up in a second if you want to look at it online too. All right. I will see everybody on Monday.
It doesn't play what you're, a little bit of problem.